We in Clare believe that artificial intelligence, or AI, will fundamentally change the way we live and work. It is also likely to become crucial in addressing society's grand challenges, such as climate, energy and mobility, food and natural resources, health, and inclusive, secure societies.
Clare strongly supports the development of AI made in Europe, with a strong focus on responsible and trustworthy AI for the benefit of all citizens. It supports the United Nations Sustainable Development Goals and promotes two central goals, AI for good and AI for all.
Following our establishment in June 2018, we have become the largest AI network worldwide, focused on research and innovation in the world.
Europe has all the expertise needed to progress rapidly in the deployment of these technologies, but we need to direct our energy and resources towards building a coherent infrastructure to stimulate deployment and adoption, build up an effective innovation ecosystem, and drive excellent research.
Building on Europe's existing strength across all areas of AI with its strong universities, research institutions, and companies, Clare wants to ensure that many of tomorrow's advanced technologies, products, systems, and services are European and are based on and reflect European realities, needs, and values.
Trustworthy human-centric AI leverages a broad spectrum of AI techniques, including machine learning, automated reasoning, and multi-agent systems. To achieve global impact, we need large-scale investments into AI talent, AI infrastructure, as well as the effective and responsible deployment of AI systems across all sectors of our economies.
We need to invest broadly to support excellence in AI in regions throughout Europe. We need to invest in central facilities and infrastructure to bring together AI experts and other stakeholders to create critical mass and global visibility. Most importantly, we need to invest now.
Join Clare and support us in achieving our inclusive and ambitious vision for European excellence in human-centric, trustworthy AI.
The time to act is now. Join us in shaping a brighter European future.
Well, hello everybody, and welcome to today's session. It's a very interesting time we're living in, and one of the questions we have to ask ourselves is how do we turn European excellence in various areas into shaping the infrastructure and the ecosystem that we need. Now, let me show you some slides here. My name is Morten Irgens, and I'm one of the founders of Clare and member of the board. And today we have 10 thinkers, 10 people with 10 minutes each about innovation ecosystem for AI. Now, just mentioning a bit more why we're doing this. Clare was established as a research network and has today more than 430 groups, AI research groups, research institutes, research labs across 35 countries, I believe. It's a solid network. And the question is, what do we do with that network? How can we transform that into value? Not only is this a solid network of research lab, it's also covers all areas of AI. So it's AI for all, but it's all of AI. But also we are building up an innovation network of startups, companies, entrepreneurs, established businesses and we are also establishing a network, the R2N network, the Rising Researchers Network, which is a network of young researchers, PhD students, postdocs, etc. And Clare has 4,000 supporters across Europe. So the question is, how do we shape this into more? How can we connect these pieces together and make them collaborate and cooperate and work together. So my name is Morten Irgens. I have many hats, and today my hat is as a founder of Claire, and we will also hear from Laurent Daudet, following me, from Wim de Waele, from Cathrine Lyngstad, from Andreas Liebl, from Birte Hansen, from Jonas Andrulis, from Maria Lundqvist, from Annika, Linck, and from Tomas Mikolov. And as you can see, we will have an exciting 1.5 hours or 2 hours in front of us to address the issue of AI ecosystem from different perspectives. And because technology defines our sovereignty. Sovereignty is a function of having secure access to what everyone is dependent on: food, water, energy, technology, data, and AI. And we have seen how there is a focus in Europe today on strengthening our technology sovereignty, our data technology, our data sovereignty, our research sovereignty. We have seen it during the German presidency of the European Union. We have seen it from the top of the Commission, and we have seen it from many of the governments in Europe, that there is a need of strengthen our sovereignty in technology, in AI, in data. But there are some dualities in Europe that are very interesting. We have strong innovation indicators. This is the list of the global top 25 innovative countries in the world, and the European ones are in green. So it looks really great. We are really there. But if you look at the input indicators, the stuff we're putting into our economy, into our innovation ecosystem, and compare that with what we're getting out of it, it turns out, taking Norway as an example, that we're putting a lot in and not so much comes out. So there is sand in the machinery. There are things we can do about it. Here, you can see the difference between how United States scales in this, if you only look at input indicators or if you only look at output indicators. So there is some sand in the machinery. Europe has a lot of competence, high educational attainment, but we are also lacking competence. There are relatively few serial entrepreneurs that can help us moving to the next level. There are few talents in the science and art of international sale and marketing. We have a problem with finding people filling positions in ICT, in technology, and in research. We do great and a lot of research. This is share of AI researchers. A little bit old statistic. It's 4 years old, but these are the number of scientists who have published at least one paper over the course of 10 years in AI in China, United States, and Europe. And if you look at the percentage distribution between them, Europe is doing great. But if you also look at the innovation, how much funding that has gone to startups, the share of AI startups, it's a very different story. And why do we have this difference? So there is lower investment activity. Another duality that is interesting. We have great universities, but they are less entrepreneurial than some other regions. And we may not have a very useful model of innovation. Our universities, a lot of our funding agencies, the general thinking about how innovation happens is a bit old-fashioned. It looks at academia as a place that is thinking great thoughts and then hand them over to a grateful industry via a technology transfer office. Only the name in itself of a technology transfer office gets this wrong. This is not the way it works. It's not a linear push from academia to industry. The classical triple helix model looks at it this way, and where the government's role is to make sure that there is some transfer from academia to industry. But we know that this is not the way innovation happens. It's in the modern, complex knowledge economy, innovation is much more complex. It has many components from many sectors, entrepreneurs, established industry, risk capital, public sector, etc. And they are not, there is no linear transformation here. It's a complex, non-linear, messy process that is better, that works better the closer the components are integrated and cooperate and work with each other. So that is an innovation ecosystem to some extent. And it's how can we make that work better? How can we turn up the volume and get more things, more value out of this and forget about this linear thinking? Now, so we have incumbents, we have disruptors, we have thinkers, we have doers, and what is the next step for Europe here? So I'm happy to then hand the baton over to Laurent Daudet, who's who is a CTO and co-founder of LightOn. Please, Laurent, the floor or the screen is yours.
Thank you, Morten, and thanks for the kind introduction. I'm delighted to be with you on this fireplace chat about AI innovation in Europe. So my name is Laurent Daudet. In a past life, I used to be university professor in physics at one of the leading universities here in Paris, France. I know I'm CTO and co-founder at LightOn. And so my presentation will be about how language models, the massive large language models, can be a booster to an AI-driven Europe. So what are these language models? I mean, maybe some of you have heard of GPT-3, and GPT-3 is really a new generation of AI. You really have to understand the impact of what it is. You just write one sentence, write a professional email to Tom Sanders, a salesman for a laser company. You click generate, and there you are. You have a perfect email, very good English. The AI has invented any specific use of the laser, and you can generate as much as you want, and that's it. You may do even more sophisticated things like Instagram ad. Please write an Instagram ad. You program in natural language. You don't program in some specific code. You say, I want an Instagram ad with a stress on luxury on diving, and there you are. Perfect ad, very good English. You can note that the word luxury is translated into luxurious, so it's beyond just simple keywords. And there you are. And we at LightOn, we strongly believe that we have to do it natively in European languages, not just only English, but it's very important to go beyond translation. And here we just took an example of generating French language, and we prompt with some like newspaper article, and then it generates exactly in the same time, same type of content. So yeah, you really have to understand that we are living now a new generation of AI, and with the GPT-3 for the text, but there's also Codex or AlphaCode for code programming, AlphaFold for drug discovery, which has been, could be claimed as the most important achievement in AI ever. And we have never seen a transfer on technology and business that fast. I mean, these things were in the lab 2 years ago, and now they already have a very strong impact on research and technology. What's really defining is that these models are extremely hard to build. The training data, we call it civilization scale. like in the type of language models we train on the equivalent of millions of books. That's as many books as you have in national libraries. So we call them civilization scale. The software, like it's very hard to keep up with all the innovation in this domain. And also it pushes the limit of hardware. You need some of the largest supercomputers in the world to train these models. It drives new chip architecture, and it will require new hardware technologies tomorrow. On the other hand, once it's trained, for the users, it's never been so easy to use. The models that we have, you can just access them through an API. You don't need any AI or machine learning expertise to use them. Extremely simple. You program them in natural language, make an Instagram ad, and that's it. You interact like you would interact with a colleague. And so we believe this opens the door to AI across industries. Really, there is no sector that cannot use this type of AI models beyond translation, I believe. So all the big giants in the US, in Asia, have invested massively in these models. And there is, I think that was already mentioned, there is an issue of sovereignty here. And so LightOn, what we do is one of the very few companies able to build this AI just for the ground up and bring it to the market. We are going to release in a couple of weeks our API in 5 European languages: French, German, English, Spanish, and Italian, the largest model in French, German, Spanish, and Italian. But we're also designing innovative photoing hardware for the next generation AI. So our hardware is called LightOn Appliance. We have put that, this is the first photonical processor that's been put in a top 500 supercomputer since last December. And we really are into hardware and software co-design to keep up with all the requirement of massive computing for this type of models. So just to answer, in my view, what would be the ideal ecosystem for AI startups? I would say 3 things. First, access to smart capital. So I say, as a joke, it's not a contradiction in terms. Just as a comment, as an entrepreneur, talking to European VCs or US VCs is very different, to play to the caricature. US VCs in California, they say, I don't care about your business plan. I mean, it's predictions anyway. Just tell me what's your technology, and they deep dive into the technology. European investors, also to play the caricature, say, well, I don't understand the technology, it's too hard for me. What's your planned revenue in the next 15 years? Just making it, it's not that bad, but it's also getting better. But I think we, as Morten said, we need a generation of serial entrepreneurs to drive this VC world, and that's something I guess it's changing, but it has to change faster. The second thing is, we need massive exascale supercomputers for this AI generation. This is just a requirement. There is some access. We should make it easier for SMEs in particular. And I believe as well that we should get better access to public procurement. I think these new AI tools could be very useful for European administration, and I see the diversity of European cultures and languages as a strength, but also a moat, in a sense that maybe American or Chinese companies would find it very difficult to get into the market for this very specific reason. But we understand that that's part of it. That's how we are, and we share similar values despite differences in languages. And I guess that's all I want to say. There's my email. Please interact with me if you find that interesting for you. Thank you.
Well, thank you so much, Laurent. That was very interesting. We will now move directly to Wim de Waele, founding partner, miles ahead. Wim, the screen is yours.
Thank you. Can you hear me?
Yes.
Yes. thanks. I'm not going to use slides, but I would like to immediately actually pick up on your introduction, Morten, and actually then also the comments the previous speaker made. I'm going to try to answer the question on what, in my opinion, makes an ideal ecosystem and would help us in improving the statistics you show for Europe most in the next 5 to 10 years. What we need to do to actually change the trend, and whether we already see some positive signs in Europe. That's actually also, I think, part of the discourse I want to have. But before I do that, I would like to briefly introduce myself and my background, not because it's so interesting in itself, but it kind of leads up to the reasons why I have been working on trying to build accelerators and ecosystems for AI and deep tech companies. I have a training in computer science, and but as you can tell, I've already got at a certain age. And when I graduated, you know, that was the first wave of AI, the so-called expert systems and intelligent search algorithms, etc. And after graduation, I was lucky enough to, after having worked for a large European corporation, Siemens, to be able to move to an American, what now we would be called startup or scale up, with an American tech company in the 90s. And I went through a whole process of, you know, scaling a company and IPO on NASDAQ, etc., which was my training school outside of technical education on how the US technology ecosystem in Silicon Valley and beyond actually developed in those days, and what mechanisms were behind the success of it, which I'm not necessarily saying we should totally copy in Europe, because we are different, like the previous speaker pointed out, but where we certainly have to study and you know, pick up those components that are necessary to change that ratio that you showed between input and output. Yeah. And after coming back from the States, because I also worked for that company in the US, I decided to, that was in 2004, to take the lead in an initiative we were then developing here in Belgium to actually try to bridge it's not even a triangle or a quadruple helix, but the one you showed, then the industry, academia, entrepreneurial, and venture capital worlds, to actually try to bridge those. Initially, I was appointed as a CEO of a research center then called iMinds, which had as a mission, if you would read it again, very much your technology transfer logic, you know, that you just pointed out is the wrong one, the linear one, and typically working with large corporations. But we changed our strategy quite quickly, meaning about 12 years ago, which to a strategy in which we started developing a startup ecosystem in data and AI technology and computer science or software technology in general. And we didn't do that by trying to spin out as much companies as possible from our universities, but by working with accelerator like calls, like you have also in Startup Bootcamp, and all the Y Combinator and all those early stage incubators that you typically see in the US. We copied that model because we believe that the ideas and the good teams can come from very different angles. They can be academic. They can also be coming out of a large corporation. It could be a serial entrepreneur and some technology whiz kids. They can come from very different sources. And the ecosystems need to be all encompassing. And your methodology of developing new companies as an incubator needs to pick up on that talent pool that is not tied to institutions or to corporations, but that is everywhere, so to speak. That was our first attempt with the iStart Accelerator to do something that fundamentally would start creating an ecosystem of startups. And I'm going to give you an anecdote to illustrate how long it takes before that input versus output ratio that you rightly point out is for, and also Belgium was on there, has a very bad rating as well, and that or bad ratio as well, because a lot of money is being invested here in research in the universities, but the entrepreneurial ecosystem is still underdeveloped. But it's changing. And the anecdote I want to use is, I remember that 10 years ago in our iStart program, a company was founded by two very smart engineers that actually had participated or worked as developers in a previous spin out of a university that went bankrupt. They then, that failed. They then learned from that lesson, started their own company, which I'm not going to go into the details on the technology, but which was a very early stage software as a service company, early in the cycle of software as a service companies, and was very successful. It accelerated quite quickly, but was sold to actually sold to an American company 2 or 3 years into its existence, before actually there was serious local venture capital money being put in. And that was the second phenomenon you see. A lot of those interesting startup companies in these domains, they get sold quite quickly, because the venture capital world that we have is not as developed and not as ambitious as the US one. It's also changing, but it's coming along now. But I'm talking now about 5 to 6 years ago. And then they started another company. They're serial entrepreneurs. They started a new company called Deliverect three years ago. Data for the delivery businesses, the Deliveroos and all those companies, takeaway.coms. And they have now created a unicorn in 3 years, right? And the same entrepreneurs went through that cycle and learned about business models, go to market, and how to secure funding. I have to say the funding they secured for their C round now is Asian and US primarily, not European. So we still face there with the scale-up capital challenge that Europe doesn't have as developed an ecosystem of large-scale VCs as US has. But what you see, and these are now individual cases, an individual case I'm taking, but it's actually a phenomenon that I'm seeing happening. Across Europe, this focus or shift of focus of also the European Commission, of the local authorities to also support ecosystems that are much more startup focused and are not just supporting large enterprises in their research efforts, have created a generation of startups. There's a mentality that is startup friendly, but it takes a while before that starts showing in the showing in the numbers and actually starts yielding results, because it's typically those serial entrepreneurs that are then able to scale their companies. Yeah. So then the question is, what do you do? I have 3 more minutes left. So, but what do you do right now as policymakers or as ecosystem builders to actually support not just, I think the startup culture is to a large extent there, but it's not as efficient in conquering certain markets and really going global as the US companies and the US ecosystems or Asia. What do you do to address those challenges? I think different things. I need to focus on the 3 elements that the previous speaker also mentioned, and I'm going to just again use an illustration of 2 initiatives I'm involved in. One, you need to make sure that the companies that we build, the technology companies or that entrepreneurs build, quickly get to the market at scale. And one of the initiatives I'm involved with is, for example, an IoT and AI hub that tries to connect those emerging companies, AI and data companies, with the whole world of ports, maritime logistics, but also the energy transition challenges of that sector. And by as much as possible giving them or supporting them, giving them access to the market, and build local references, we can actually help them scale faster internationally. But more importantly than that, I think the other thing is access to capital and support in developing the right business models. And I'm a strong believer. I was involved in that iStart Accelerator program, which is now part of the IMEC research center, because iMind was merged into it, my previous organization. iStart still is a very successful accelerator, but I think we should go further in supporting investors, so entrepreneurs. So I consider it my duty, so to speak, and I've assembled a number of serial entrepreneurs who previously had exits in building not only an investment fund, but also a studio, a venture builder that supports first-time entrepreneurs so they don't make all the same beginner's mistake and start thinking globally from the start. And I think that's true specifically for AI and deep tech companies. We have to look at scale there. There are a lot of interesting applications that can be built on these base technologies. And as soon as we identify them, we need to support the entrepreneurs in scaling these ideas and provide them with enough capital, but also with know-how on how to build global companies. So that's why we launched this Miles Ahead Studio. And I would encourage anybody who thinks that some of the ideas that I just voiced resonate with him or her to contact me on the data that I provided. I have lots more, and I'm always willing to collaborate at the European level on that. Thank you very much.
Oh, wonderful, Wim. Thank you very, very much for these thoughts. These are more than thoughts. They are thoughts that are structured and very to the core of challenges we have. We'll get back to some of your points a bit later. Now we're going to move over to Cathrine Lyngstad. And we are moving around in the ecosystem. Cathrine represents the public sector. I would say not only any public sector. The Norwegian Labour and Welfare Administration, I do believe they manage about a third of the Norwegian government's budget. So Cathrine, the screen is yours.
Thank you. First of all, thank you so much for inviting me. It's very interesting to also meet and hear and talk to people from the rest of the ecosystem. This is something that we need. I talk a bit about then what we already do and what our visions are within AI and welfare at NAV. And of course, also how we can use the ecosystem. Morten mentioned NAV. 1/3 of the national budget runs through NAV actually. 1 out of 2 Norwegian inhabitants will receive any kind of benefit or service from NAV within a time period of 2 years. And as this graph shows, a large proportion of Norwegian population receive any benefit or service from NAV. This means that we, of course, in all of the contact points, whenever they receive a benefit or whenever they receive an advice from NAV, we have a possibility to increase the experience for that user and actually give some benefit to the society. So there's a huge potential in use of data, AI technologies. And of course, we also, as we have data about a lot of people in vulnerable situations, and we have a lot of data about the people that we have data about, we have to be very careful about how we use the data, of course. So huge potential, but we need to be responsible. So why AI in public sectors? Maybe you won't ask that, but some others ask that. Is that really relevant? How is it useful? 2 years ago, Norway got its own national AI strategy, and there's actually a whole section about AI-driven innovation in public sector. They pointed out a number of areas. The first is about more relevant guidance and service to inhabitants. Something around kind of personalization, you might say. At least this is something that directly hits the users. Secondly, it's about the decision support that we can give to the employees, the staff in the public administration, which will, of course, also lead to better services, but it's not necessarily directly to the inhabitants. And thirdly, it can be used to increase efficiency and optimize our resource allocation. So I'll give you examples from how we use or plan to use AI within each of these areas, and also how we have already collaborated with others and how we use the ecosystems, and also what we lack from the ecosystem today. So the first example is about job matching, because Arbeidsplassen, that's the marketplace where job seekers can find open positions, and also employers can find candidates. It's in Norwegian. The clue here is that when you're an employer and you're looking for people who are job seekers, previously they had only these hard-coded filters. You could say what occupation, what part of the country, and so on. And they actually started using then a more smart algorithm that returned a sorted list of relevance, so that if you were a baker, they looked for a baker and you used to work at a cafe, it would understand that. So a lot of course, ontology and NLP behind that. What we make use of here is something called PES, that's the European Public Employment Services Network. So I've met with people from Pôle emploi in France and with what's it called, Bundesagentur für Arbeit in Germany and so on, and seen their solutions, heard what they've done and so on. That's very useful, definitely. Here we also use industry solutions from private companies. So the ontology behind this matching solution is called YAMS. They're based in Switzerland, which is an example of, because we often say that we want to build a lot of stuff ourselves at NAV. We want to take responsibility and ownership to our own solutions. But of course, when something is available, we use that. And the challenge is mainly actually on the legal side here. And that counts for all our examples. So what you also see that we need to include other professionals in our discussions, our ecosystems. We talk about like AI and often focus on the technology, the algorithms, infrastructure, but we need the legal people on board. That's very important, because that's what's hindering us to actually further elaborate on this and use it in other areas right now. Another example, when you're sick, after certain weeks, NAV needs to evaluate if you should be invited to a so-called dialogue meeting. What we have been working on, because those who work on this say we need better decision support. For some cases, it might be obvious that they need or do not need a meeting. So we developed a prediction algorithm for the length of the sick leave. What we have used here and that we should look at, I think GovUK, that's kind of a public sector initiative in the UK. They share a lot about what they do, the methodologies, ethical standards, and so on that we have used. We have been participating in the sandbox for the DPA of Norway, Datatilsynet. Actually, they have published a report from our sandbox project, which is, I can add a link also when we share presentations. It's available online, which I think is incredibly important and good to share with other public and private companies, how to do this legal and responsible. We're also collaborating with research institutions. Big Insight is a collaboration with universities and research companies in Norway related to big data AI. We're collaborating on them on actually how to explain the outcome of this algorithm. Very useful. So I'll just say then, keep on sharing is caring. I mean, share everything you do. We try to do that, and also can make use of things that others share. Thirdly, chatbot. Some might say this is not real AI, but anyway, NAV has a chatbot, Frida. She helps NAV clients 24/7. As long as you know how to write Norwegian, that is. At least from the beginning of the pandemic. I don't know how it would work out if we didn't have chatbot, Frida. So if you ask if you have to apply for child benefit, for instance, you get a quite good answer from her. However, if you're English speaking, you have to click here and you're told you have to call between working hours. Actually, there are plans to make this available in English, but what we, and we have also here, private company providing parts of this service called Boost AI. We have been using also the National Library of Norway, who publish a lot of NLP resources. But however, what we see is, what we miss is, it should be easier for us to actually just make this service available in English than it is. And I think it's both about legal stuff. We see the provider here, Boost AI, say themselves that, whoa, you're the first company to actually ask us these questions, because it's difficult for public sector to actually find the legal grounds to develop AI and also to use our data to develop AI. As well as we would need, I think, a better network across countries, across sectors, because it's difficult to navigate today and find all relevant contributors and resources. So, and this network should be facilitated, I believe, in order to get it to work. So we believe that the collaboration will be successful when we include other professions in our networks, not only the AI professionals. When we share whenever we can, when we have facilitated cross-sectoral networks, and when we collaborate on public sector legislation between countries. So thank you.
Thank you so much, Cathrine. So that was the view, or a view, from public sector. We will get back to some questions possibly, but I know that you have to pick up some children in the kindergartens. I have a question that I would like to ask just now for you. It's an exception. Do you think that procurement is an important tool in bringing what you do and how you do it in creating collaborations, not only just procuring, but creating collaborations with startups, with execs, or with more established companies?
Yes, I believe so. However, as I said, first of all, we now see that there are some legal issues that need to be fixed first, for sure. But after that, definitely. And also at NAV, in other areas in AI, we have been starting to use some of these innovative, collaborative setups that are in our way, and we really believe that that's part of the future.
Well, wonderful, Cathrine. Well, we are moving on, and we will move on to Andreas Liebl from the European startup landscape. So, Andreas, the screen is yours.
Hello, thank you from my side. Thanks for having me here. Yes, so as you already introduced, I'm working on the European startup landscape, and I would like to talk today a little bit about the realities of AI startups in Europe. And for that, let me just share a little bit. So, and I just want to follow up what Wim said before, because I think it's a rather similar organization that I'm part of. It's called here in the bottom, it's called Unternehmertum. Unternehmertum is actually one of the largest and oldest innovation centers in Europe. This year we have 20 years of existence that we celebrate. And I can just only confirm that it takes a very, very long time to build up successful ecosystems that actually grow and strive. So within our ecosystem, there are about now 70, 80 startups per year that are created, about 300-400 startups that we have, and about 3 billion euros in investment that per year goes to these startups. So with that kind of background of what Unternehmertum is doing, we built Applied AI with the idea of shaping Europe's innovative power in AI. And just very, very quickly, what we do is with more than 50 people, we really help the ecosystem grow. So our main goal is really help innovation grow in the field of AI in Europe, do lots of trainings, lots of connections, many companies work globally on a couple of topics. And one is this mentioned European startup landscape. Before I come to that perspective on the startups, let me quickly emphasize the status of the industry. And what we developed there is what we call the AI journey. Companies start with just thinking about AI, then they do some experiments, try out what's possible, then they become practitioner, then really professional in using AI, scaling AI into businesses, and then shaping their industries with AI. Now, if you look at the industry, many companies are either at this not started level or at the experimental level. And if you now look at that from a startup, then at the experimental level, it's all about proof of concepts. It's getting a proof that there is some value out of that. The problem is that's neither sustainable for the startups, nor is there any value creation for these companies. Then there are much fewer companies that are at this practitioner level. And this is where slowly some value generation takes place. And then there are very few companies in Europe from our perspective at that professional or shaper level that, like from the large industries, really scale AI. And the issue is now, if they scale AI, they want to have the partners they can scale their businesses with. And if you look at the large corporations, they typically work not with European startups, because the European startups are too small to be that partner to scale globally in really significant measures with these large organizations. So you have this chicken and egg problem that on the one hand, you have these companies that are not far enough. And on the other hand, you have also the startups that are not big enough for the large companies to then really collaborate with these startups to push them forward. And now the startups come in, and it's a second part, and start really at the shaper level to start with AI first innovation, and with the goal of becoming really a large player, really disrupting their industry. So while the existing organizations do that from that transformational perspective, moving from not started to professional and maybe sometimes shaper, the startups really start already with that shaper business in mind and build something new there. And that is really important for our ecosystem and the innovation in Europe. If we want to become leaders also in the application, Morten said it in the beginning, we need to be much more efficient. We need to get output out of it. And then I think startups play a vital role in building that type of output and really focusing on that shaper level from the beginning. So now looking at the startups, and this is just a small snapshot of the European startup landscape. It's here at AIstartupseurope.eu, where currently we have Germany, Sweden, Netherlands, Norway, and France collaborating, selecting the best startups of their countries and bringing them in the same categorization to an overview, because what we actually want is to help European companies find easier, good AI startups. And if you just look at that and the development of the startups and what happened in the past years, you actually see a very good news, which is that there's a highly dynamic ecosystem. So the amount of startup grows drastically. Also, these startups become bigger. But with that comes the bad news. It's really hard to identify the good ones. Because obviously every startup says we are the best startup in our field, we have the best technology, and maybe sometimes it's just marketing. They don't even have a solution yet, and so on. So it's really hard to identify the good ones, especially if you work across borders. And what we want to develop and help support here is with that startup landscape, that the national initiatives really do that quality check so that organizations can find easily the good startups and kind of tested and quality approved startups in these different categories and fields. That's open, so any country who is interested in joining can join that. And I'm really happy to already have these 5 countries working together on the topic. So if you now look a little bit more deeper into that startup ecosystem, you have now really looking at specifics of AI. And in AI, you have 3 main drivers that changes the mechanics of the whole ecosystem and the dynamics of that market if you look at the AI as a technology. First of all, AI develops incredibly fast. And that means that there is a massively expensive infrastructure. We heard that from Laurent before. Exascale compute, we need infrastructure, and that changes like from year to year. You have these drastic improvements, so you continuously have to invest massively in infrastructure. And then there are some standards not there, like explainability or stability and so on. And now comes the European Commission, says, hey, we want to work in trustworthy environments, while on the other hand, there is not even these standards being developed. So it's really hard to scale due to these constant changes and the edge cases that come in, the constant investment in AI, and you have to have a very good VC, like a venture capital ecosystem, and some risk-taking approach, because you don't know what's coming next, and you need to develop the future. That means leading and going ways where there was no one before and trying things out. And I think that is what we still lack in Europe, and that really hinders in that first place the startups seem to take off. And we see that in the US and China, where there's on the one hand much more risk taking, on the other hand a much better developed VC ecosystem that helps on that part. The second is that AI actually still needs a very large service component. There's always a retraining. It's always an kind of an evaluation of the performance of the tools instead of a classical validation setting. So there is lots of work continuously being done. It's not an easy software as a service business model that leads to lower margins and growth challenges, because you need much more workforce and much higher invest in sales and in operations. But on the other hand, that gives you also a higher lock-in as a startup. That type of business is not as accepted, and also the companies don't hand out these types of contracts to startups easily. And that is what I mentioned before with this chicken and egg problem. You have to have large startups that then get easier these large contracts, but as a small one, you really struggle into getting to that type of business model. And the third one is that AI's value actually lies in the trained model at one point in time, and maybe half a year later. And we heard about language models, and a large language model, if you see the speed of development there, the model itself is maybe a year later outdated. So the network architecture is open source. You can in many cases, you can build these things, but the training then creates that value, but you need to have specific data, otherwise everyone else can do that as well. And then you have this issue of data ownership that is different from a model ownership. So it's actually also hard to create that defendable position. And you need to do that through the application with domain-specific or even company-specific data. But it's really hard to create that lock-in effect through IP, if it's even possible, due to that constant focus of kind of open sourcing things, but also then the data that lies within a specific user group, and that is typically not the data that is owned by the startups themselves. So we need to get much better into kind of an openness and data sharing to develop new innovations together. It's not only done by technology, but this merge of technology with specific data. And also here with the regulations in Europe and the, I would say, conservative approach of companies to sharing data and handing data out, it's really hard to defend the startups' position. So that, from my perspective, is where we need to get better at. We have many startups. We need to get from these startups to much larger startups to really compete globally, also with the startup ecosystem that you have in other parts of the world. You are muted.
Yes, excellent, Andreas. Thank you so much. Very interesting, and a very interesting path or development you are doing with the European startup landscape. It's fascinating to follow. We have now heard 5 of 10 minutes from each. Now we're going to hear the 5 next ones. And the next one out is Birte Hansen. She is she's working in NORA, the Norwegian. Well, there it is. Norwegian Research Consortium in AI, and in Claire. Birte, you're going to tell us how to get startups and scientists to talk. The screen is yours.
Can you all see my screen as well?
We do.
Perfect. Thank you so much, Morten. So my name is Birte Hansen, and I work as the Innovation and Industry Coordinator for the Norwegian Artificial Intelligence Research Consortium, which is also popularly called NORA. NORA is a consortium that consists of, let me see if I can switch. Yep. 15 universities, university colleges, and research institutes across Norway. We actively contribute to facilitate joint research projects between partners, and we take an active part in supporting startup companies in artificial intelligence, as well as we strengthen the collaboration between the consortium partners and the business community in Norway. NORA is also a proud partner in Claire, and we have taken an active role in representing Claire, the Claire office in Norway and also in the Nordics. NORA's aim is to position Norwegian research and in artificial intelligence on the international arena and to create meeting places for the Norwegian ecosystem within AI. But to get to the point, how do we in NORA get researchers and startups to talk? For some, the world of academia and the world of startup or entrepreneurship seems like two polar opposites. In the last couple of decades, greater attempts have been made at bringing these two worlds together, as academia and the startup world can greatly benefit from each other. Universities, governments, industry, and startups are all vital parts to get involved if you're going to build a thriving and innovative ecosystem for AI. So what can each of these actors do to further inspire and strengthen research-based innovation? How can startups approach and collaborate with academic partners and vice versa? And how can we also inspire more innovation to come out of our universities through commercialization, for instance? In 2019, we launched NORA, that startup, which has since become known as our innovation platform. Since inception, NORA, that startup, has grown to consist of 30 plus startup companies, and we also have about 40 plus researchers that are interested in entrepreneurship. NORA, that startup, is of course one of several initiatives within NORA. It is a national networking arena for and by the research and startup community in Norway, within the field of machine learning, artificial intelligence, and also robotics. Our target group is Norwegian startup companies who develop technological solutions of their own in machine learning, artificial intelligence, and robotics, and who also focus on research-driven innovation and development projects. Many of our startups have come from TTOs or have strong collaboration with partner universities. In addition, we also represent researchers or students who are interested in entrepreneurship, or perhaps to aspire to become one, or who would like to collaborate with entrepreneurs to collaborate to commercialize good technological solutions. Academics or startups are not the only partners that we do have in our ecosystem. We also collaborate with incubators and clusters who have a high degree of expertise and experience in research and, of course, development, but also business development, which is reflected in our NORA Startup Board, which consists of professors, researchers, and also incubator representatives, we also have coordinators, and we also have founders of startups as well. So the main goal of NORA Startup is to build a knowledge-based innovation arena that facilitates networking and collaboration opportunities across the research and startup community in Norway within the mentioned fields. But we also want to engage with public actors and, of course, industry representatives. NORA Startup focuses on the dissemination of knowledge and competence and the exchange of experiences. And we also, of course, wish to facilitate for collaboration opportunities. Through collaboration between industry, incubators, startup companies, public actors, we are currently building a national innovation network for research-based innovation. But how do we work in practice? How do we get our researchers and startups to talk? Well, by creating arenas where they can meet. We have heard about today the need for infrastructure, also need for capital and so, but I will focus on the platform where we need these various different types of actors to actually meet. And in NORA Startup, we have many activities where our aim is to introduce and facilitate collaboration between researchers and startups. When NORA Startup prepared our application to apply for from Innovation Norway to become an ecosystem for innovation within AI in Norway, we released a survey amongst our members where we asked, what do you want NORA Startup to be? The answers that they provided resounds with what any innovation ecosystem should have. For us, for instance, the results clarified that there is a need for meeting arenas where actors can meet, both startups, researchers, public actors, and industry actors. For our startups who are research-driven, there was an expressed need to meet in arenas with a focus on research and development where researchers and startup companies could share experiences, build networks, and also lay the foundation to start collaborating on research projects with our academic partners. We also identified a need to create a platform where our startups could be introduced to investors and also be introduced to, for instance, public funding opportunities. We've therefore hosted many different types of events where the focus has been on available funding from Innovation Norway, from the Norwegian Research Council, also, of course, from the EU, such as the EIC Accelerator, Eurostars program, Pathfinder. And we also arrange NORA Startup AI Investments Days, where we invite investors to attend both national and also international. Since our launch, we've had over 30 plus events, both webinars, of course, during Corona. We've also had physical and hybrid events. And we've invited speakers both from academia, but also from the research community, from the startup community, to present their research. For us, it has also been very important to tie students and entrepreneurs closer together through student-startup collaboration. We have focused on establishing ties between students and startup companies, and we've also focused our efforts in encouraging startups to hire industry PhDs. By reaching out to master's and PhD students who have worked for startups during their education, for instance, as well as as well as startups that have experience with hiring students, we have started the work of dedicating a separate resource page with information to students who wish to collaborate with startups, and our startups also have many available positions for students who are interested. The focus for us is, of course, to introduce actors who can benefit from collaboration between and, of course, also across startups, industry, public actors, and within academia, where artificial intelligence is the focus. I would also like to briefly add a separate finding that we also got from the survey, namely to have a database that can function as an overview over the ecosystem and a tool for both research companies and startup companies in Norway. The Norwegian AI Directory was established and launched in 2021 by Alex Moltzo, a great colleague of mine, and presents in a very clear way the relevant AI actors, educational programs, conferences, funding opportunities, AI startup companies in Norway. The aim of the directory is to have a clear overview over the various types of actors within the AI ecosystem in Norway, and also, of course, the AI projects that could be relevant for startups to know about. NORA Startup was built to bridge the gap between scientific breakthroughs and the commercial use of AI. And one very important part of that puzzle is to promote and help early phase innovators to help them connect with researchers. Previously, there was no platform to showcase and connect AI startup companies in Norway. not only within the ecosystem, but also for early investors and also potential customers and also partners. Without a visible and effective platform, as we now are trying to establish, many potential partners could fail to discover the various different talent and also opportunities that lay within our network or lay within Norway. NORA, in NORA Startup, we will continue to support our partners and members by listening to their needs and by creating meeting places where they can be introduced to the various different relevant actors, and of course attain information about funding relevant research projects that are taking part, for instance, at our partner universities. Having such meeting places are crucial to produce a successful, innovative ecosystem within AI, where ideas can spring to life and where innovators can find the competence and support necessary to commercialize their ideas. From what we have seen in NORA Startup, having an arena where researchers and startups can meet is an excellent recipe for getting them to talk. Thank you.
Excellent, Birte. This is very interesting, of course. Governments all the time are asking universities to collaborate more with industry. So universities ask the professors to collaborate more with industry, and the professors look around and say, what do I know about industry? Well, and then they have some big names they go to, because how can they know which startups are out there and how exciting it is to work with them? So there's two questions. How do startups and scientists find each other? And second question is, well, when they have found each other, how can we help them? It's very fascinating. Thank you, Birte. And now we are moving to our next guest, which is Jonas Andrulis, founder and CEO of Aleph Alpha. Jonas, the microphone is yours.
All right. So yeah, thanks for the lovely introduction. I'm going to add to the entrepreneurial perspective that Laurent already talked about and Andreas also mentioned. Who am I? I'm a KIT engineer. I'm a serial entrepreneur. This is the third company I started, and I spent 3 years at Apple's AI R&D kind of team in their leadership in their special projects division. Aleph Alpha was founded in 2019, basically driven by what I learned at Apple and my kind of understanding that really there's a new generation of AI. The last generation of supervised models that are merely functional approximators with very specific and narrowly defined inputs and outputs are kind of on its way out. We mentioned GPT-3, but it's not the only model. There's a bunch of giant models that are doing phenomenal things and are moving towards new ways of human-machine interaction. We are currently 30. We have a small office in Berlin, but all technical roles are in Heidelberg. And we've recently imported people from Google Brain, from Microsoft Research, and are kind of bringing them back or kind of luring them to Germany. What's sovereignty about? You've probably all seen the recent post by Meta that they acquired 16,000 A100s, and so that's quite a decent number. And on the right-hand side here, you see that the big industry labs are ramping up their revenue big time, right? So that's a kind of, you see the rise of money spent in research as part of their revenue. So yeah, what's going on here? They're building proprietary silicon, and transformative AI is arguably on its way. And I've included here a screenshot from the Open Philanthropy report about transformative AI. Like, when the question here for this chart is, when will humanity be able to first produce transformative AI? And transformative AI really defined as something that will change our world, will change how we work, will change what we call work, and basically can impact the global power dynamic. And to me, and it's important that we understand technological sovereignty, not just about data protection, not just about like who is hosting my data, but who is able to change the future, who is able to build the systems that will, in all kinds of visible and less visible ways, change the way our future looks like. We've already seen this with Google, with OpenAI, very openly telling us that they are changing the way their models behave based on what they think ethically or ideologically is the right thing to do. We have built an own data center. We have some A100s by ourselves, which is like one of the biggest commercial clusters out there. And we're also partnered with Oracle Cloud, one of the big drivers. And we're not at 16,000, nowhere near. But one of the big drivers is that this research requires compute and requires resources. And it's also like a big point for acquiring of talent, right? Being attractive is we need to be able to do these research. Laurent already mentioned that it's about more than just language understanding. You could just like put a translator in front of GPT-3, and this kind of shows why you maybe shouldn't do that. This is a very naive question. It's the question about its favorite sports team. And we're asking our language model in 5 different languages, and we're getting different answers in all of those languages. Like in German, it's Bayern Munich, and in Italian, it's Inter Milan. And of course, the model knows about famous players and stuff like that. The thing here is that language carries much more than just the actual language, but it has culture, it has values, and something that is kind of implicitly in your training data. And you can very easily see that if you ask GPT-3 the same thing and you ask in German, then you'll get the New York Giants, right? So, I mean, that's maybe like a simple example, but I think that the takeaway here is that these models, even if you don't influence them based on ideology, already through the selection of training data, they will behave differently. If you select training data to be English-speaking data, then a lot of the European culture and values is just not in there. When you look at what intelligence actually drives, it seems to be that what we call intelligence, what we call perception and how we work, it's basically a world model built on top of our perception. So here on this paper, it's described as a prediction machine, right? Where the brain uses prior knowledge of the world to make inferences and create hypotheses about the cause of incoming sensory information. So, and that's what we believe these models are, or what we believe these models will be. Right? And this is illustrated here in like a visual space. These squares, like these boxes, are not moving. But because our brain is basically not just processing raw sensory information, but basically using this raw sensory information to do a prediction inference on our world model, then all kinds of interesting effects can appear. One of our recent research is Magma. We just open sourced that a few days ago. And this is basically an addition, an enhancement of classical language models to full multimodality. What you can do is you can take like a typical language model, like a GPT style model, you can freeze all its weights, and then you can add multimodality. So you can use it just as you would the language model before. And with very little cost, you can add multimodal capability. And I'll show you what that means. That means that you can do much more than just captioning or object detection, right? So you can ask for the left-hand side picture, you can ask the woman is covering the man's eyes too, and then model tells you, keep him from seeing what's in the box. Right? And you can get very detailed description, a tree felling worker cutting the trunk of an uprooted and fallen large oak. And this is, of course, powered by these large language models in the background. You can even do things like technical drawings, right? On the left-hand side, you can ask where the treasure is buried, and you got the old oak tree. Right? So this is kind of implicit OCR. There's so much context knowledge there, right? Because yeah, that's the red X. We all know as humans that the red X means there's where the treasure is. But where does the AI know this from? And you can actually do what I call true, in quotes, multimodality. And that means that it's not just one image and then text, but what you can do is you can input 2 images and then the text, the difference in these images is, and this will give you the angle of view. The first image is from a low perspective, while the second one was taken at an elevated position to give you more detail in your viewing experience. Right? So I think this is where the technology is moving towards true multimodality. You can do similar style models also for audio or video. And we are currently adding this to all our language models. And I'm very interested to look at scaling laws, how these multimodal features and capabilities are influenced by the size of language model up to 200 billion parameters. Oh yeah, we mentioned the trust and explainability. And of course, this is also something that's very important to us. Here you see basically a heat map on the multimodal model, where you can, for a single text token, you can have a look at the region in the image that most influenced the creation of this text token. Here it's for ship and for rocket. In looking forward, Laurent already said, building language models is not super easy, but it's also not super difficult anymore. We open source the code base with Eleuther. Basically, you can just grab that and bring your data and train them. And what we're currently moving towards is a more hybrid and more symbolic understanding to help deep learning kind of get around the wall and don't hit the wall. And something like an ego module where to me, like when you've worked in reinforcement learning, right, you know that this can also be powered by a world model. And you know that for a reinforcement learning agent, it's very obvious that the right thing to do is not the thing that is most likely, but the right thing to do is the right thing to do, right? So you need some concepts of goals and values to do the right thing. And I think for us, for Europe, it's important to retain or re-import the right talent. And the problem here was never Europe. Europe is a phenomenal place to live. We don't really have to convince people to move to Heidelberg. We are surrounded by brilliance. We are surrounded by the best universities. We have started a PhD program with Christian Kersting from TU Darmstadt. We are working with KIT, we're working with DFKI. So there's brilliant people here and brilliant professors and researchers. The problem was really only the great projects. We didn't have the teams, we didn't have the companies that were working on the really interesting, the really attractive technologies. So if you were basically asking yourself in the past, I want to work on top AI, I want to work on top augmented reality, you had to leave Europe. And this is what we're trying to change. And I'm happy to see we're not the only ones that are kind of approaching that. Yeah, that's my look from our perspective.
Well, thank you very, very much, Jonas. Very interesting. Creating excitement is important for Europe. Creating excitement will draw attentions, will draw talents, and will draw investment. And excitement we create when we get the right people together and we get the ecosystems to function around you. So we'll get back to that. Now we're going to move on to Maria Lundqvist. Maria is from the Commission's Artificial Intelligence and Blockchain Investment Fund, the European Investment Fund. Maria, the microphone and the screen is yours.
Hello, and thank you very much. I will now share. Let me see the screen. Okay, I hope now you can see my screen very well. Yeah, so hello everyone, and thank you also Claire for this wonderful opportunity to participate here today on this session on the ecosystem of the European artificial intelligence industry. And I really love how you managed to bring together all these excellent speakers representing various parts of the overall ecosystem. And Morten, as you in particularly highlighted in the beginning when it comes to the input versus the output, and that we see that in Europe we put a lot of effort in, but maybe we don't really get out as much as we should, or in particularly when we compare to the US. So during my time slot here today, what I intend to present is, I will first of all give you some insights to the findings of the work of a artificial intelligence and blockchain study that we did at the EIB. It was launched last year. And then I will, of course, blend in this overall question on what is a good AI ecosystem for me, and in particularly then from the public investor perspective. Because indeed, so my name is Maria Lundqvist, and I'm a finance advisor at the Innovation Finance Advisory Team at the European Investment Bank. And for those not too familiar with the EIB, so the European Investment Bank Group, on the one hand is the European Investment Bank, and on the other we have our subsidiary, the European Investment Fund. And we are the EU's bank, so we are owned by the 27 member states, and we are really the long-term lender of the European Union. And then more specifically, where do I work? So at the Innovation Finance Advisory Team, which is an integral part of our EIB, let's say, global offer, where we have the lending, we have blending then together with the instruments or mandates from the European Commission, and also advisory activities. So we work in my team with innovative startups and scale-ups in a wide range of sectors, and really help them to realize their growth plans and investment projects. So in short, you can say that we help projects to become bankable or financeable. But also apart from individual company, we work more horizontal on a thematic basis, where we provide market intelligence and access to finance analysis. And as you can see here on the slide, I try to show a couple of let's say of our digital portfolio, and especially to the very right, when it comes to the providing market intelligence and the undertaking of access to finance analysis. We have now developed quite a broad range of technological expertise and finance expertise, so beyond AI and blockchain. But of course, here I will particularly focus on the AI and blockchain. So here you can absolutely scan this one, and then you will come directly to the study. And maybe I will just start by saying that, I mean, we really live in transformative times, and a lot of things are happening very, very fast, and not the least when it comes to disruptive technologies and the impact and that they have on our lives and in our societies. And I mean, we have the pandemic as an obvious and tremendous accelerator, everything digital, but also, I mean, in the current and of course very unfortunate geopolitical situation, the role of digital technologies play a very large role here. And also when it comes to the discussion on data sovereignty that we just heard, and also controlling of data and the cyber attacks, cyber warfare, which is of course very much linked to AI as well. And here, I mean, in the end, it's all about transparency and creating an AI ecosystem that we can trust. And in my opinion, I don't think it will ever be a fully flourishing AI ecosystem, neither in Europe or at global level, if we cannot trust it. So from my side, perhaps that's the first answer to this overarching question on what is then a good AI ecosystem for me. So yeah, it needs to be trustworthy. And then if we just look a little bit in the strategic importance, because coming back again, what was said when it comes to strategic autonomy and digital sovereignty, so both artificial intelligence and blockchain as well, I mean, it's two of the most disruptive technologies of our times, and they can really help us to solve many of the pressing challenges we are facing, and not the least when it comes to the green transition. And really with this sustainability and the fair and human approach in mind, the innovation can open up many new growth paths that are both smarter and more inclusive, more sustainable, but also, as mentioned, on the strategic autonomy point of view, and to develop European in-house technological capabilities. And we have now seen also the very recent launch of the EU Chips Act, for example, which partly also relates to AI. And so this is why also these technologies are very strategic. But then coming to the actual findings of this study, as mentioned, that it was launched last year, I think it was in June, so based on thorough market analysis, on surveys and in-depth interviews, the overall objective of this study was to provide a set of recommendations and actions to improve, in particular, the access to finance conditions for AI and blockchain companies in Europe. And first, then, to get a very comprehensive view, we analyzed the access to finance conditions from different perspectives. So here from the supply side and from the demand side, also looking into the market matching system, as well as the overall innovation ecosystem and across the value chain. And what we find was that on the one hand, we really see in Europe that the investments are quite limited. So first, when it comes to volume and overall, the competition for global technological leadership in AI is really speeding up. And there has been a tremendous increase at global level and also in Europe of both AI and blockchain companies. And I think Europe actually increased by tenfold over the past 3 or 4 years. But the overall availability of venture capital funding remains a key issue for Europe. It's real because Europe only accounts for 7% of the capital flowing to AI and blockchain startups, investing, as you can see here, 1.75 billion, which stands quite in contrast to the US 16 billion. And also what our study shows, or what we estimated, was when it comes to investment gap. And here the overall investment gap consists of both equity and debt. But what we can see is that the particularly most pressing part is on the equity side. And if we also then look at comparing AI with blockchain, yes, AI consists of the largest part, but that is also because of it's more developed and more mature technology in blockchain. But we also see that it's coming more and more on the blockchain side. And also what was highlighted earlier here today, that Europe really lags behind when it comes to the later stages of financing. So we do quite well when it comes to the earlier and seed stage, but then when the ticket sizes needs to be larger, we are really lagging behind. And also what I would like to mention is when it comes to specialization, because it's not only about the volumes, it's also about the specialization. And in particularly when it comes to VC funds, we see that in Europe we lack these specialized investors that can really understand these disruptive technologies and deep tech more broadly. So it's a real asymmetric information gap. And what we also see that, yes, in Europe we have a few, but those that do exist, yes, they are good, but they are too small. So this is really an issue which we really hope to help to tackle. And then also when we look at the innovation ecosystem more broadly, we see that it's very fragmented. And we all know that economies of scale derives from concentration, from integration and proximity of talent and financing, and all these various elements brought closer together. And there are a couple of potential spots of excellence. Of course, there are many good companies, good research organizations, entrepreneurs in Europe, but they tend to be less connected and less specialized than many of the other ones that we see that are thriving globally. Just to take a few examples, that we have 55% of all European AI and blockchain companies or SMEs are located in only 4 countries. And also on the investment side, we see that Germany and France account for roughly 70% of all amounts invested by European venture capitalists into AI and blockchain since 2010. And we also see that other prominent centers do not really receive the same or similar in relation to each other investments in proportion to the number of SMEs they actually have. So the lack of integration can really affect innovation programs and initiatives that are promoted by the public sector, which again would then lead to more fragmentation of resources across countries, but also across technologies. So in the end, it will hamper scaling up and the developing of the big champions that we so much would like to get in Europe. But of course, I don't want to paint a totally gloomy picture here. So rather the opposite, seeing that, okay, it's a lot of things we actually could do. And also when it comes to Europe, as we all perfectly know, that the fundamentals are very strong, and we have great talent, we have great researcher. It's as Morten, as you framed it, we need to put the input into a proportionally higher output. And how do we then do that? So what we found in our study was in particularly 3 big pockets of recommendations. So first, on the development side, so we need to do more to boost financing for AI development and scale up. And this includes focusing on increasing the volume, but also, as mentioned, the specialization, and to carve out funding for growth stage. And on very concrete terms, this can be looking into expanding, for example, the current running EIB-EIF AI blockchain co-investments facility, or looking into the EIB venture debt financing, but more broadly, how the public sector can support and crowd in the private sector. But then also when it comes to deployment, so we need to support the take-up and the adoption of AI technologies in the market at member state level, but also through, let's say, dedicated more advisory services and helping to support traditional companies in the uptake of these technologies, and in particular now also in the recovery after the pandemic. And then when it comes to the innovation ecosystem, here we would really need to create a more friendly and integrated European innovation ecosystem, which better connects digital and the technology hubs to improve the exchange of experiences, of expertise and talent. And then if we move a little bit from the market insights to concrete actions, so as the
Maria,
yeah,
you need to start on your landing phase.
It's one slide, is okay.
Yeah, okay, excellent. Thank you so much.
So what we financed, for example, last year is in total of 95 billion. And then if you see here to innovation, digital and human capital, almost 21 billion. So with that said, with a lot of volumes, we also can create a lot of impact. And then we mentioned this smart capital. So it's really about being smart. And therefore, I would conclude with this. So then, from the investor side, what is a good AI ecosystem? We need to provide finance and support throughout the whole business life cycle. So that includes from the seed stage to the startup to the emerging SMEs, mid caps, and for large companies. So with those words, I will end here and say thank you very much. And back to you, Morten.
Thank you so much, Maria. It's fabulously interesting and also points in some directions, which is important. Obviously, this is not the last time we are talking about these issues. We are 10 minutes behind. So I would like Annika, if you don't mind, could we do Tomas before you, Annika? Would that be okay?
Of course. No, of course.
Okay, because of some scheduling issues. So then I would like to introduce Tomas Mikolov. Tomas, everything is yours.
Okay, thanks. I will try to share my slides. So just give me a second.
Thomas, we cannot hear you.
Thomas, where?
Can you hear me now?
Yes.
Oh, okay. So there was some issue when I was sharing the slides. Sorry for that. I will try again. Oh, there's this share audio that I should not click on. Okay, I hope that everything's fine now. I guess you should be seeing my slides. Is it fine?
It is not shown in presentation mode, but then you have to advance by clicking on the left.
Yeah. Okay.
There you go.
So I guess we can. Okay, great. Sorry for the delay. So just I can start. So I will be talking mostly on like how do I see this AI ecosystem from a researcher perspective. I think there was a lot of very interesting ideas that were already mentioned in the previous talks that I would like to kind of like extend on. I actually find it very interesting that so many talks did mention language modeling in the context of AI, because that's actually what I was working on as a PhD student for like many years. And interestingly, I was working actually on these neural language models, which were considered at my time as something like some crazy idea that will never work. Actually, that's some of the reviews that I did receive for my work. But eventually, I actually made the neural language models successful even on large data sets and for like many tasks like machine translation, speech recognition. And thanks to that, I did get later jobs at Google Brain and Facebook AI, and most of my experiences then from the corporations. Later, I returned to Europe because I wanted to focus more on basic research and do the next big things. So that's basically kind of like my background. How do I actually see the ideal AI ecosystem in Europe? Well, I think that the AI research should really focus on research. Like we should be focusing on getting new things done, making impossible things possible, and coming up with bright new ideas. Many of them will not work, but the ones that will work, they should actually have some impact on the world. They should change the way how we can be solving problems, and they should lead to some non-incremental advancements. That's basically how I see the optimal case. Of course, we are far from it. We can be wondering like what could be done differently, and for that I have like these problems that from my point of view are present in academia and industry. So first, in academia, I would say that there's a lot of research that is being done just for the sake of publications. Like there's this publish or perish. We have many metrics of how the success is measured in academia. And that actually does not lead to, in my opinion, like a good environment. There's a lot of papers, again, like that are published, where if you ask the authors, they will just basically tell you that they just needed to have some publication because of some points to whatever metric, or because they need to finish PhD and they have some objectives to be fulfilled. So I think that this is quite an issue. The other problem that I see is that much of the decision making is not transparent and is kind of like very secretive. Like much of my career, I was actually trying to change the way how research works by making it much more open. I mentioned the language modeling that I used to work on. In my time, the data sets were not public. The code, how you actually produce the models, was not public as well. Everything was private. You didn't have the data, you didn't have the code. There was no simple way how to reproduce results of the R groups, and basically the language modeling was kind of dead. Try to change it by actually making some data sets public by making my code public as well, and it actually worked. Many people started working on language modeling, on neural language modeling by starting, for example, from my code and extending it. So I think that being transparent and open is actually very good. And it works in science. For some reason, I think that we inherited from the previous generations some mechanisms that in the current world, where we have internet, where we can exchange information very quickly, where we can have databases, we can actually create a much better scientific community where, for example, the reviewer's job does not need to be seen as something that is done for free by anonymous people, but it can be something that can be seen as part of our jobs, which basically, in my opinion, the reviewing should be really like seen as a job. You should have also like a history of what you did as a reviewer, what decisions did you make, with some objective criteria that could measure which people are actually doing this job better and which people are doing this job worse. I think that if we would rework this reviewing process, not just for papers and their acceptance at conferences and journals, I think that we researchers all know a lot of stories where these processes were completely broken. It's the same even for the grant system, where if you want to start, for example, a research group, you need to apply for a grant, and it's very non-transparent at the moment. I can say from my own experience, as I was mentioning, like I did work on a lot of things in NLP that did lead to kind of like breakthroughs. I think I'm one of the most cited researchers in the world at the moment in the NLP area. I think based on Google score, maybe the second most cited. When I did leave to the US, I was working at these top teams. Still, when I returned to Europe, where there's a lot of complaining that we have this brain drain going to the US, I returned to academia and I applied for a couple of grants. I wasn't able to get any funding so far from the public sources. I think that kind of like explains what I think about the current system. It just doesn't work. Then much of the funding actually is allocated, in my opinion, like in not a good way. It's not just the grant process, but even like how the research community currently works. I don't think that it's a smart thing to spend so much money for GPUs as it is currently done today. It's maybe good for NVIDIA and companies that are producing these specialized hardware. But on the other hand, we don't need all the universities building their own kind of like computing clusters worth a lot of money, because in the end, they should be trying to come up with new ideas. They should be driving the research forward, and the scaling up. That's something that can be done in the industry. Simply changing the benchmarks of success would actually help here, so we can have some limitations on the computational budget that can be used in publications, which would actually solve this problem. So instead of like this competition over which university secures more money to get more hardware, to get slightly bigger models than the others, to win a competition, we should not really be focusing on this and spending money this way. We should be focusing on which university actually has like people who can produce the best ideas that can actually work better than the ideas of the others, not who just buys the most GPUs. So that's for the academia. I've spent actually more time in the AI industry, but just basically in the US. So I also have some ideas here. I'd say that it was what I mentioned also like in the previous talks, but there's tons of input, not so much output in EU. We can see that US and actually even China is much more successful than we are. And we can be wondering how things could be fixed. In EU, we have a lot of problems in industry. For example, the tax systems where actually companies from the US are paying often almost no taxes in EU, where local companies actually do have to pay much more. That's completely broken. This should have been changed long time ago. I know that it has been this topic has been discussed many times, but it's still not solved, and it's a very important one. So that the local companies, European companies, should not be in a disadvantage compared to foreign companies. This simply has to be fixed as soon as possible. Then the reason why actually China is quite successful in AI is that because they were able to actually create their own AI industry, and they did it through protectionism. I don't know what's the solution for Europe, but we should be also like wondering how to make actually AI industry in Europe. And of course, like we should be connecting universities and industry. There should be some way how the industry can actually fund research at universities, but without damaging actually the basic research. Also did see that in Czech Republic, for example, there was this shift where a lot of funding was moving towards applied research, but that basically destroyed the incentives for researchers to work on basic research, and that's actually not good. So a couple of ideas what from my point of view should be considered that we should be doing. We should focus on big things first and solve the details later. I think that sometimes people just talk about insignificant details too much. And from my point of view, we can just focus on the money, where the big money goes. And at the moment, when it comes to AI industry, simply in Europe, we are just giving all the money to American AI monopolies such as Google, Facebook, and other companies that are actually making a lot of money, often by selling us products that are using technology that was developed in Europe. I think that that is a bad situation, because this money again gets taxed in US. Then these companies fund universities and startups in the US much more than in Europe. Then there's data that just goes to US, which actually means money in this world of AI. Jobs also like are being created in the US, not in Europe. So this is something that we should be trying to solve first. Very through protectionism, by splitting these companies. Maybe that's a solution. I think it's up for discussion, but it's important to focus like on where these tens of billions of euros are like going every year, and then better allocate funding. So applied research should be about really making the impact in the real world. It should not be just about taking the latest model and doubling the amount of parameters there and pretending that it's research. So we should be like aiming either on ambitious basic research that is trying to make some new ideas to work that didn't work before, or when it comes to applied research, it should really be about doing research that really is being used and not just writing papers for the sake of writing papers. Then the decision process, as I mentioned a little before, should be much more transparent. There should be history for the reviewers, and they should be selected based on their success in the previous decisions as they were making them. And there should be certainly less bureaucracy as far as I see it. Many researchers at the university spend way too much time by just filing for these grants and filling tons of papers, where actually they are doing that instead of actually doing research. So that's the ideas from my side. So thanks for the attention.
Well, thank you so much, Thomas. That was clear, to the point, and very important. Obviously, it's very, very aligned with a long list of points I have as well. I do believe we will get back to these issues because we need to shake up. We need to shake up things in Europe in order for us to move ahead. It's obvious. It's obvious. Thomas, thank you so much. We have come to number 10 on the list. Last but not least, as it is said, Annika Linck from the European Digital SME Alliance, the Small Medium Enterprise Alliance. Thank you so much, Annika, and everything is yours. Go ahead.
Thank you very much, Morten, and good afternoon to everyone. Good afternoon to all the participants, and thank you very much for the invitation to this important discussion. I was very I found it very interesting to listen to Thomas just now, because he has, of course, a very applied experience. What we do at Digital SME is that we do think about how to create an enabling environment for SMEs, so small and medium-sized enterprises and startups that develop technology solutions, well, our companies and the ICT sector. And in 2019, we came up with a manifesto with 10 key priorities for Europe's digital future. I just added that just now because I thought that it could be interesting, because Thomas, for instance, mentioned the aspect of fairness and taxation. This was one of the first points in our manifesto. We also want to really help innovative companies to grow, so investing in innovation, etc. We have more points here. The manifesto is from 2019, so a little bit may have to be updated, but it's really good to see also that researchers that have experience from the US and that have a broad global view come up with similar ideas as we have in our manifesto. Coming back to the presentation. So yes, my name is Annika Linck. I'm EU Policy Director at Digital SME. Digital SME is a business association of SMEs in the ICT sector. So our companies, they develop software, they deploy and develop cybersecurity solutions. Some of them are AI developers. So really ranging, as Andreas Liebl had also shown, we have some companies that are quite advanced and others that are doing more basic data analysis and data intelligence solutions, but then also others that really develop algorithms that work with image and natural language processing. So really showing having the whole range of these types of companies. But I think Andrea was even better at explaining the different stages these companies are in. When we look at the digital transformation, we look at it more from the sectoral perspective and from the perspective of small and medium-sized enterprises in general. So we call these SMEs in the ICT sector, we call them the digital enablers, because we believe that they can help to transform Europe's industries. So we have in total 25 million SMEs, and out of them 4% are ICT SMEs. So we try to cluster them very roughly in this pyramid. And what we think is important is that these digital companies work with the other companies to help them transform, to move to digital business models or digitally based business models. This is, of course, on a very broad scale, but as a business associations, we communicate also a bit more from this bird's eye perspective. We have also launched a focus group on artificial intelligence, where we bring together SMEs that develop AI solutions, and they are really different types of companies. They have different maturity levels of AI. They deploy and develop AI solutions for different sectors. And altogether, we have about 140 companies in this group, which are, of course, not all the AI innovators that are out there, but they give us a good idea in terms of what their needs are, because they're from different EU member states, different maturity levels. And we talk to them regularly to develop position papers and to have an idea of how SMEs in Europe feel about the AI environment and they operate in. So the business environment they operate in. So yeah, you can find the companies on our website. They have a range of different activities. Just before this morning, we also had a conference on smart cities, for instance. There are a couple of companies that deploy AI solutions in the area of smart cities using image data they collect to help cities solve issues such as identifying holes in the road and fixing them. And yeah, it's a very, well, there's a lot of potential here that we see when talking to our companies. And I think that's also something that was mentioned by the presentation earlier by Maria, that there are all these innovative players out there, but then we have some issues of really enabling them to scale and to grow. Going a little bit on the demand side, so we also talked to the companies to find out what their clients are really demanding, because of course, in order to drive and develop a thriving AI ecosystem in Europe, this has to be built on market demand as well. We can, of course, support by investment, but yeah, the market forces are what can really drive growth in the end. And so in this rather small study that we did with the JRC, we got as a result that most of the clients of the companies we surveyed were interested in machine learning, computer vision, for instance. So some specific applications. And yeah, I think it's rather interesting to also look at this demand side, because as said, this is what can also drive growth and innovation. We also asked the companies what they think are the main barriers for AI adoption in Europe. And they said access to finance, so the money aspect, access to data, and then the lack of talent. And then, yeah, going back to the drivers, they would think that improving predictions is extremely important for their clients, supporting decision-making and optimizing internal resources. So I think this is also, it echoes quite well with what was said previously. And yeah, maybe that's also where solutions can be found. We also looked at a wider study, which was a wider enterprise survey conducted. And here they broke it up in internal barriers to AI adoption and external barriers. And in terms of the external barriers, they're also similar to what we identified in terms of the lack of available funding or financing, data standardization issues rather than data access, but I guess there's a little bit of an overlap here. And then some regulatory obstacles and liability issues internally. Again, the issue of skills and talent costs is of course also an important component. I wanted to talk a little bit about the upcoming legal framework on AI, because that's something we've been looking at with our companies, as this is going to set, of course, the framework as well. And if we talk about the European AI ecosystem, I think it's something we have to also consider. So with our focus group in AI, we've developed a position paper in response to the European AI Act, and also a smaller version of that, which we should call a fact sheet. And yeah, basically, we do believe that, of course, it's beneficial if you have, harmonized rules across Europe, so AI innovators can actually, they know what the rules are. If they go to a different country, they don't have to face a different type of regulation. So maybe in terms of the scaling aspect, that is very helpful. But what is even more important is to really develop this European AI ecosystem and to have an innovative environment where trustworthy and ethical AI can be developed and can be scaled. So maybe this is a little bit the impression we have, that in some areas at least, we should rather focus on this, supporting the innovation, rather than focusing too much on creating a framework where companies have to comply with a set of rules, often based on standards, because the compliance costs are are actually really high for small companies, and this can burden them even more and hamper innovation. So we're a little bit worried about that.
So Annika, we need to round off.
This is the last slide, so I'm actually this is really the final part. So just to sum up, we really think that our AI innovators can play a very important role in this digital transformation, and also, well, both at the local level and then scaling up, that it is important to focus on these companies because they inherently in their DNA, they also incorporate these European values, which should be, you know, supported with the AI Act. But maybe we should rather focus on supporting innovation and scale of these companies rather than focusing so much on making them comply at this stage. So yeah, thank you.
Annika, thank you so much. This is so important, and the small and the SMEs across Europe is the fabric of Europe, and so it's extremely important that we start to weave an ecosystem where SMEs, larger industries, government, universities, investors, etc., find each other easily and are feel themselves as a part of an innovation fabric, an innovation ecosystem across Europe. We need to do this. We have seen why we need to do it. And if we don't succeed, we put our the future welfare and financing of Europe in danger. So we're on a mission. And this is, we only have a few seconds left. So I will end by thanking you so much for participating as presenters and participating and listening to this session. And the only thing I can say now is to be continued. Thank you so much.
Thanks. Bye. See you soon.
Thank you. Bye.